She rescued a dog thinking she was saving a life, but this gesture led her to discover an unexpected secret. What is this dog hiding? And how could it change everything? Get ready for a story full of mysteries and surprises. The rain fell incessantly on the small town of Oakwood, Texas, as Abigail Carter walked through the narrow streets, her body tired after another long day at the local animal shelter. Water droplets ran down her face, mixing with tears of frustration that she didn't even realize she was shedding. Abigail had always dreamed of making a difference, but lately, her efforts felt like drops in the ocean. Each animal rescued was quickly replaced by another abandoned one, and the idealistic young woman began to question whether her actions really mattered in the grand scheme of things. As she walked, her thoughts wandered to the faces of the animals she had cared for that day, the hopeful eyes, the wagging tails, the paws eager for affection. She wondered how many of them would find loving homes, and how many would spend their days in cages, waiting for a chance that might never come. It was in this moment of introspection that Abigail heard a low, trembling sound coming from a nearby marquee. Stopping abruptly, she narrowed her eyes, trying to see through the curtain of rain. There, cowering against the wall, was a skinny, soaked dog, shivering violently. Abigail's heart squeezed at the sight of the helpless creature. Without hesitation, she slowly approached, speaking in a low, soft voice. "Hey, little buddy, it's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog raised its head, its brown eyes meeting Abigail's. There was something in that look, a mixture of fear and hope, that touched her deeply. She crouched down, carefully holding out her hand. "Come here, boy. Let's get out of this rain, okay?" To her surprise, the dog stood up with difficulty and took a few hesitant steps towards her. Abigail smiled, feeling an instant connection with the animal. "That's it, good boy. Let's go home." Carefully, she took the dog on her lap, feeling its prominent bones under the wet fur. "I'll call you Buddy," she murmured, stroking his head gently. "Looks like we both need a friend today." The walk to Abigail's apartment never seemed so long. She whispered words of comfort to Buddy, who snuggled into her arms as if he had found a safe haven after a long storm. Upon arriving home, Abigail immediately wrapped Buddy in a soft towel, drying him carefully. She prepared a bowl of fresh water and another with some kibble that she kept for emergencies. Buddy ate and drank greedily, as if he hadn't seen food for days. While the dog was feeding, Abigail sat on the floor next to him, watching him intently. "Where did you come from, huh, Buddy? Someone must be looking for you." But on closer inspection, she saw no collar or identification. Buddy seemed to have been alone for a long time. As the evening progressed, Abigail found herself talking to Buddy as if he were an old friend. She shared her frustrations about working at the shelter, her dreams of a world where no animal would be abandoned, and even her doubts about her own path in life. "You know, Buddy," she said, scratching behind the ears of the dog, who was now lying comfortably next to her on the sofa. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm really making a difference. But then I meet someone like you, and I remember why I started all this in the first place." Buddy looked at her, his eyes filled with an understanding that seemed to go beyond what you'd expect from an animal. Abigail felt a wave of affection run through her body. "Tomorrow we'll go to the vet," she decided. "We'll take care of you and then we'll see. Maybe we can find you a loving family." But even as she said these words, Abigail felt a resistance growing inside her. The idea of parting with Buddy, even for a good home, already seemed painful. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, Abigail fell asleep on the sofa, with Buddy snuggled up next to her. She didn't know it yet, but that chance encounter in the rain was about to trigger a series of events that would change her life forever, revealing long-buried secrets and forging connections that transcended time. Fate had brought Buddy into her life for a reason, and soon Abigail would discover that some stories of love and loyalty are written long before we are born, waiting patiently to be revealed when the time is right. The next morning, Abigail woke up to the first rays of sunlight penetrating through the curtains. Buddy was still beside her, his head resting gently on her lap. She smiled, stroking the dog's soft fur, before getting up to get ready for the day. "Come on, Buddy," Abigail called, grabbing the car keys. "Time to see Dr. Anderson." The veterinarian's office was in the center of Oakwood, a red brick building with a worn sign that read, "Anderson Veterinary Clinic." Dr. Robert Anderson had been an institution in the town, caring for local animals for over 3 decades. Upon entering the clinic, Abigail was greeted by the familiar scent of antiseptic and pet food. The receptionist, a middle-aged lady called Dorothy, smiled when she saw her. "Abigail, darling, who's this new friend?" "This is Buddy," Abigail replied, stroking the dog's head. "I found him last night in the rain. I thought I'd bring him in for a checkup." Minutes later, they were called into the office. Dr. Anderson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "So, this is our patient for the day," he said, examining Buddy carefully. "Let's see how you're doing, Buddy." The examination proceeded normally, with Dr. Anderson checking Buddy's eyes, ears, and teeth. However, when he began to examine the dog's body, his expression changed. "Abigail, look at this," he called out, pointing to a small mark on Buddy's skin partially hidden by fur. Abigail bent down to take a closer look. The mark was a small star-shaped scar, barely noticeable if you didn't know where to look. "It's strange," Dr. Anderson murmured, frowning. "That mark reminds me of something. An old case." "What case?" Abigail asked, her curiosity piqued. The vet hesitated for a moment before answering. "There was a disappearance many years ago, a young woman called Lily. The body was never found, but I remember hearing that there was a similar mark involved in the case." Abigail felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean, Dr. Anderson?" "Well, it was just a rumor at the time," he explained, stroking Buddy distractedly. "It was said that Lily had a dog with a mark like that. Some believed that the animal could be an important clue, but it was never found." Abigail's mind began to spin with possibilities. Could Buddy have some connection to this ancient mystery? "Dr. Anderson, do you think there might be a connection?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The vet sighed, removing his glasses to clean them. "Honestly, Abigail, I don't know. It was so long ago. But if you're curious, it might be worth investigating. The local library has archives of old newspapers. It might be a good place to start." Abigail nodded, her mind already planning her next course of action. After finishing her consultation and receiving instructions on how to look after Buddy, she left the clinic with a new determination. The Oakwood Library was an imposing Victorian-style building, with high shelves full of books and a comforting smell of old paper. Abigail headed for the archives section, where she found dusty boxes of old newspapers. Hours passed as she scoured the yellowed news, looking for any mention of Lily's disappearance. Finally, her tired eyes settled on a headline from decades ago. "Young local disappears mysteriously." The article talked about Lily Thompson, an 18-year-old girl who had disappeared without a trace. It briefly mentioned a dog, but there were no details about a specific brand. Frustrated, but not discouraged, Abigail continued her search. It was then that she found something unexpected, a black and white photo of a smiling young woman next to an older woman. Abigail blinked in disbelief. The older woman was unmistakable, her grandmother, decades younger. With trembling hands, Abigail read the caption, "Elizabeth Carter, right, with friend Lily Thompson at harvest party." Shock hit her like a wave. Had her grandmother known Lily? Why had she never mentioned it? Abigail leaned back in her chair, her mind full of questions. She looked at Buddy, who was sleeping peacefully at her feet, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions that her arrival had unleashed. "Oh, Buddy," she whispered, "what have we gotten ourselves into?" As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the library windows, Abigail knew she had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple lost dog. Family secrets, an unsolved mystery, and at the center of it all, a dog with a peculiar mark. She carefully put the newspapers away, made copies of the relevant reports and her grandmother's photo, and got ready to leave. As she walked home with Buddy, Abigail felt she was on the threshold of a journey that would change her life forever. The past and the present were about to collide, and Abigail was determined to find out the truth, no matter where it took her. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Abigail's small apartment, finding her already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on the black and white photo she had found in the library. The image of her grandmother and Lily Thompson smiling at the camera as if they were keeping a shared secret. Buddy, lying at her feet, raised his head and looked at her with understanding eyes, as if he sensed her unease. "What do you think, buddy?" Abigail murmured, leaning over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Should I call Mom and ask her about it?" After a few moments of hesitation, Abigail picked up the phone and dialed the familiar number. Each ring seemed to last an eternity, until, finally, the voice of her mother, Claire, filled the line. "Abigail, darling, what a pleasant surprise. How are you?" Abigail took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Mom. I found something interesting yesterday and I wanted to talk to you about it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What did you find, dear?" "An old photo," Abigail replied, her voice trembling slightly, "of Grandma Elizabeth with a girl called Lily Thompson. Do you know anything about it?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was charged with emotion. "Oh, Abigail, I had hoped that this matter would never come up." Abigail felt her heart race. "Mom, please, what's going on? Who was Lily?" Claire sighed deeply. "Lily was a very close friend of your grandmother. They were inseparable in their youth, but there was more to it than that, Abigail. Your grandmother, she had a love that the family didn't approve of, a love that kept her away from all of us for many years." Her mother's words hit Abigail like a punch in the gut. "You mean Grandma and Lily?" "Yes," Claire confirmed softly. "They loved each other. But back then, in a small town like Oakwood, that kind of love was complicated, dangerous even." Abigail closed her eyes, trying to process the information. "What happened to them?" "It's a long and painful story, dear. Your grandmother eventually returned to the family, but she was never the same. As for Lily," Claire's voice faltered, "nobody knows for sure. She just disappeared one day." A million questions raced through Abigail's mind, but one stood out. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "To protect you, to protect your grandmother's memory. Maybe also because it was too painful to remember." Claire paused. "Abigail, why are you asking about this now?" Abigail hesitated, looking at Buddy. "It's a long story, Mom. I found a dog and, well, I think it might have some connection to all this." "A dog?" Claire's voice sounded confused. "Abigail, what's going on?" "I'm not sure yet," Abigail answered honestly, "but I promise to tell you as soon as I understand better. Thanks for being honest with me, Mom." After hanging up the phone, Abigail sat on the floor next to Buddy, hugging him as silent tears streamed down her face. The story of her grandmother and Lily was both tragic and beautiful, a forbidden love that echoed through the decades. Determined to find out more, Abigail decided to visit her neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Hawkins, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 60 years. If anyone knew the ancient secrets of Oakwood, it would be her. Mrs. Hawkins' house was a small Victorian building with a well-kept garden at the front. Abigail knocked on the door, her heart racing with anticipation. Mrs. Hawkins answered, her blue eyes shining with curiosity from behind her thick glasses. "Abigail, darling, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in." Sitting in the cozy living room, cups of steaming tea in hand, Abigail began to tell her story, from finding Buddy to discovering the photo of her grandmother with Lily. Mrs. Hawkins' expression changed from surprise to deep sadness. "Oh, child," she sighed. "That's a story many in town would rather forget." "Please, Mrs. Hawkins," Abigail begged. "I need to know the truth." The old woman nodded slowly. "Your grandmother Elizabeth and Lily were the talk of the town at the time. Two bright young women, full of life and love for each other. But their love was seen as taboo, something to be hidden and condemned." She paused, her eyes distant as if she were reliving long-buried memories. "They planned to run away together, you know, to start a new life away from disapproving looks and evil whispers. But the night they were supposed to leave, Mrs. Hawkins let the sentence hang in the air, her voice laced with emotion. "What happened?" Abigail asked softly. "No one knows for sure. Lily disappeared, and Elizabeth was devastated. She spent years looking for answers, but never found any. Eventually, she returned to her family, but a part of her always remained with Lily." Abigail felt a lump in her throat. "And the dog? Was there a dog involved somehow?" Mrs. Hawkins' eyes shone with recognition. "Yes, there was. A dog that Lily adored. He disappeared the same night as her. Some said the animal knew more about the disappearance than any living person. When Abigail left Mrs. Hawkins' house, her head was spinning with all the new information. She looked at Buddy, who was waiting patiently for her on the sidewalk. "Looks like we've got a mystery to solve, Buddy," she murmured, stroking the dog's head. "And something tells me you're the key to it all." As they walked back home, Abigail felt a mixture of emotions: sadness for her grandmother's lost love story, determination to uncover the truth, and a growing sense that she was on the threshold of something far greater than she could ever have imagined. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Oakwood sky in shades of orange and pink. Abigail knew that her journey was just beginning, and that the secrets of the past, buried for so long, were about to come to light. Dawn found Abigail sitting on the balcony of her apartment, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, and Buddy lying faithfully at her feet. The revelations of the last few days weighed heavily on her mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions and unanswered questions. As she watched the sun rise over Oakwood, tinting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Abigail made a decision. She needed help to unravel this mystery, someone with investigative skills and an objective eye on the situation. With a determined sigh, she picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello?" A male voice, still hoarse from sleep, answered after a few rings. "Lucas, it's Abigail. Sorry to call so early, but I need your help." Lucas Harrison, her childhood friend and now an investigative journalist at the Oakwood Gazette, was exactly the person Abigail needed. After a brief explanation, Lucas agreed to meet her at the local cafe in an hour. The Oakwood Diner was a cozy establishment, with red leather stools and the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toast. Abigail found Lucas sitting at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him. "So," Lucas began, after the initial greetings, "tell me everything from the beginning." Abigail took a deep breath and plunged into her story, from finding Buddy to the revelations about her grandmother and Lily. Lucas listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. "Wow, Abby," he said when she had finished. "That's incredible. And do you think this dog, Buddy, might have a connection to Lily's disappearance?" Abigail nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but there's something about him, Lucas. The mark, the way he appeared, it can't be a coincidence." Lucas frowned thoughtfully. "Well, as a journalist, I've learned that coincidences are rarely just coincidences. Let's look into it together." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Lucas used his contacts at the newspaper to access old archives, while Abigail continued her research at the local library. They interviewed older residents of the town, collecting fragments of memories and rumors about Lily's disappearance. A pattern began to emerge. Lily was often seen with a dog, described as her constant companion. Some remembered a distinctive mark on the animal, although the details were hazy after so many decades. "It's like Buddy's a ghost from the past," Abigail murmured to Lucas one afternoon as they went over her notes in her apartment. Lucas nodded, his eyes shining with journalistic excitement, or a silent witness, if only he could talk. At that moment, Buddy, who had been dozing on the carpet, lifted his head abruptly, his ears standing on end. A second later, someone knocked on the door. Abigail exchanged a confused glance with Lucas before answering. Outside stood an elderly man, his wrinkled face marked by years of sun and wind. "Miss Carter?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I hear you're asking questions about Lily Thompson." Abigail felt her heart race. "Yes, I am. Please come in." The man introduced himself as Frank Donovan, an old friend of Lily's. As he settled into the room, his tired eyes landed on Buddy. "My God," he whispered, his voice laced with emotion. "It's like seeing a ghost." Abigail and Lucas exchanged meaningful glances. "Do you recognize Buddy?" Abigail asked softly. Frank nodded slowly. "It's not possible that it's the same dogs, of course, but the resemblance is incredible. Lily loved that dog more than anything. It was a gift, you know." "A gift?" Lucas leaned forward, his journalistic instincts sharp. "Yes," Frank continued, his eyes distant with the memory. "From Elizabeth. It was a symbol of their love, I think. In difficult times, when they had to hide their feelings from the world, That dog was like a link between them. Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes. What happened the night Lily disappeared, Mr. Donovan? Frank sighed heavily. I don't know all the details, but I do know that Lily was planning to run away. She told me she was going to start a new life, away from trials and hatred. The dog was supposed to go with her. But something went wrong, Lucas deduced. Frank nodded sadly. The next morning, Lily was gone. The dog, too. Some people said they saw a strange car in town that night, but no one ever found out the truth. As Frank spoke, Buddy approached him, laying his head gently on his lap. The elderly man smiled through his tears, stroking the animal's fur. It's as if he knows, Frank murmured, as if he carries the memories of all those years. After Frank left, Abigail and Lucas were silent for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Abigail spoke up. Lucas, what if Buddy isn't just a coincidence? What if, somehow, he's a link to the past, a chance to find out what really happened to Lily? Lucas looked at her seriously. Abby, this is bigger than we imagined. It's not just about a lost dog or an old case. It's about love, sacrifice, and secrets buried for decades. Are we ready for where this could take us? Abigail looked at Buddy, who returned her gaze with an intensity that seemed to contain the wisdom of several lifetimes. She felt a determination grow inside her. We are, Lucas, for Lily, for my grandmother, and for all those who have been silenced. It's time to bring the truth to light. As the sun set over Oakwood, casting long shadows across the room, Abigail, Lucas, and Buddy formed a silent alliance. The past and the present were about to collide, and they were at the epicenter of this impending storm. The mystery of Lily Thompson, so long dormant, was about to be unearthed, and with it, secrets that could change Oakwood forever. The morning sun seeped through the gaps in the curtains into Abigail's apartment, finding her already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on Buddy, who was sleeping peacefully on the living room carpet. The revelations of the last few days weighed heavily on her mind, mingling with a growing sense of connection with Lucas. She couldn't help noticing how his eyes shone with determination when they discussed the case, or how his casual touch on her shoulder sent shivers down her spine. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her reverie. It was Lucas, arriving earlier than scheduled, with a warm smile and a box of donuts in his hands. I thought we could use some sugar for the brain, he said, placing the box on the table. Abigail smiled, grateful for the distraction. You know me too well. As they ate, they discussed their next steps in the investigation. Lucas suggested that they revisit the place where Lily was last seen. The old Thompson house is still standing, he explained. It's been abandoned for years, but there may be clues that people missed back then. Abigail nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Let's do it. The Thompson house stood on the outskirts of Oakwood, an imposing wooden structure that had seen better days. The paint was peeling from the walls, and the windows were covered in boards, giving the place a ghostly appearance. Buddy, who accompanied them, seemed restless, sniffing the air and barking softly. It's almost as if he recognizes this place, Abigail murmured, stroking the dog's head to calm him down. Lucas nodded, his face serious. Maybe he does. There's more to this dog than we can understand, Abby. Carefully, they entered the house. The interior was covered in dust and cobwebs, old furniture still in place, as if time had stopped decades ago. As they searched the rooms, Abigail felt a wave of emotion hit her. Lucas, she called, her voice trembling. Look at this. In a corner of the master bedroom, partially hidden by a loose board, was an old box. Inside, and they found yellowed letters, faded photos, and, to their surprise, a worn dog collar. My God, Lucas whispered, picking up the collar. Do you think this belonged to Lily's dog? Before Abigail could answer, Buddy approached, sniffing the collar with interest. His eyes seemed to shine with an impossible recognition. Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes. It's like the pieces are falling into place, Lucas. But there's still so much we don't know. Lucas approached her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. We'll find out, Abby. Together. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Abigail felt her heart racing, aware of Lucas's closeness, of the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. The moment was broken by a sudden bark from Buddy. They turned to see the dog scratching at a wall, as if trying to get their attention. "What is it, boy?" Abigail asked, coming closer. Lucas examined the wall closely. "Wait, there's something here." He pressed a specific spot, and to his surprise, a small secret compartment opened up. Inside, they found a dusty diary. On the cover, in faded letters, was written, "Lily Thompson." Abigail gasped, her hands shaking as she picked up the diary. "Lucas, this could be the key to everything." They sat down on the dusty floor, Buddy nestled between them, and began to read. The pages revealed the forbidden love story between Lily and Elizabeth, their dreams of a life together, and their constant fear of being found out. The last entry, dated the day Lily disappeared, made Abigail's heart squeeze. "Tonight, we will finally leave, Elizabeth and I, free to love without fear. Our faithful companion will come with us, a symbol of our love. If anything goes wrong, may he be our guardian, our eternal bond. May the love we share transcend time and space." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she finished reading. Lucas wrapped her in a comforting embrace, and she allowed herself to collapse in his arms. "Oh, Lucas," she sobbed. "What happened to them? Why didn't Lily ever get to the meeting point with my grandmother?" Lucas held her tightly, his own voice laced with emotion. "I don't know, Abby. But we're going to find out. For them, for you, for everyone who has been silenced by prejudice and fear." At that moment, shrouded in the dust of old secrets and the weight of a lost love, Abigail and Lucas shared a soft, hesitant kiss. It was as if past and present were merging, yesterday's love stories echoing in the promises of tomorrow. Buddy, sitting patiently next to them, seemed to observe the scene with wise, ancient eyes. It was as if he were the silent guardian not only of the secrets of the past, but also of the hopes for the future. When they finally left the Thompson house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Abigail held Lily's diary against her chest, feeling the weight of her responsibility. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Lucas entwined his fingers in hers, a gesture of support and promise. "We carry on, Abby. We unearth the truth, no matter how painful it is, and maybe out in the process, we can heal some old wounds." As they walked back to town, Buddy trotting faithfully at her side, Abigail felt a mixture of determination and hope grow inside her. The mystery of Lily Thompson was far from solved, but every step took them closer to the truth. And perhaps, Abigail thought, looking at Lucas, they were writing their own love story in the process, interwoven with the echoes of the past and the promises of the future. Dawn found Abigail and Lucas sitting at the kitchen table, Lily's diary open between them. Buddy slept at their feet, occasionally stirring as if he were dreaming. The hours of the night had been spent deciphering the faded words, searching for clues that might shed light on Lily's disappearance. "Look at this," Abigail said, pointing to an entry dated a week before the disappearance. "Lily mentions a secret meeting in the Wilsons' old barn. She seemed nervous about it." Lucas frowned, leaning over to read. "You're right," she writes. "I'm afraid someone has found out about us. This meeting may be our only chance to escape before it's too late." A shiver ran down Abigail's spine. "Lucas, what if someone really had found out about Lily and my grandmother? What if that someone wanted to stop them from escaping?" "It's a possibility we can't ignore," Lucas replied, his expression serious. "I think we need to visit that barn." The Wilsons' old barn stood on the edge of town, a decrepit structure that had long since fallen out of use. When Abigail and Lucas arrived, Buddy at their side, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields. "It's too quiet," Abigail murmured, feeling a knot in her stomach. Lucas nodded, taking her hand in a reassuring gesture. "Let's go carefully." As they entered the barn, the smell of old wood and moldy hay hit them. Buddy sniffed the ground with interest, as if following an invisible trail. "Abby, look at this," Lucas called out, pointing to a wall. Carved into the wood, almost erased by time, were the initials L, T, plus E, C. Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes. Lily and Elizabeth, they were here. As they examined the barn, Buddy began to bark insistently, scratching a specific spot on the floor. Lucas knelt down, removing the straw and dirt. "There's something down here," he said, his voice tense with excitement. Together, they lifted a loose board, revealing a small compartment. Inside, they found a rusty metal box. With trembling hands, Abigail opened the box. Inside were letters, photos, and a small notebook. "It's my grandmother's handwriting," Abigail whispered, leafing through the notebook. It's her memories of Lily." They spent the next few hours reading Elizabeth's memoirs, discovering details that had never been revealed. The depth of the love between the two women, the plans for a life together, and the constant fear of being discovered. One entry in particular caught Abigail's attention. "I'm afraid Sheriff Thompson has found out about us. He's Lily's father and a cruel man. Yesterday, he confronted me, threatening to expose our sin if we don't break up. But I can't give up on Lily. Our love is stronger than their hatred." Lucas put a hand on Abigail's shoulder. "That changes everything. Lily's father may have been responsible for her disappearance." Abigail nodded, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. "But why didn't my grandmother ever tell anyone? Why did she keep this secret for so long?" "Maybe out of fear," Lucas suggested softly. "Or maybe to protect Lily's memory." As they discussed their findings, Buddy suddenly became alert, his ears perking up. A moment later, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching the barn. "Who's there?" a gruff voice called out. Abigail and Lucas exchanged alarmed glances. Quickly, they put the evidence away in the box and hid behind some bales of hay. An elderly man entered the barn, a shotgun in his hands. "I know there's someone here. Show yourselves." Her heart racing, Abigail decided to reveal herself. "Don't shoot. It's us, Abigail Carter and Lucas Harrison." The man lowered his gun, his eyes widening in recognition. "Carter? Are you related to Elizabeth?" Abigail nodded, coming out of hiding with Lucas. "She was my grandmother. Who are you?" "John Wilson," the man replied, his voice softening. I knew your grandmother and Lily. I was doing my rounds when I saw movement here." Lucas stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, what do you know about Lily Thompson's disappearance?" John Wilson sighed heavily, seeming to age years in seconds. "It's a sad story, children. One that should have been told a long time ago." In the minutes that followed, John revealed that he had witnessed a heated argument between Lily and her father on the night of her disappearance. Sheriff Thompson had found out about the escape plan and was determined to stop it. "I should have done something," John said, his voice laced with remorse. "But I was afraid. We were all afraid of Sheriff Thompson." Abigail felt a mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, and renewed determination. "Mr. Wilson, we need to know the truth. What really happened to Lily?" John looked at her with tired eyes. "I don't have all the answers, child, but I know someone who might. The former deputy, Robert Martinez. He retired years ago, but I always suspected he knew more than he was saying." Lucas nodded, his journalist's mind already at work. "Where can we find him?" "He lives in the hills, outside the city," John replied. "But be careful. Some secrets are dangerous when revealed." When they left the barn, the sun was already setting, casting a golden glow over the fields. Abigail held the memory box against her chest, feeling the weight of the story it carried. "What do we do now?" she asked Lucas, her voice shaking with emotion. Lucas pulled her into an embrace, kissing her forehead softly. "We carry on, Abby, for Lily, for your grandmother, for all the love stories that have been silenced. We'll find out the truth, no matter what the cost." Buddy barked softly, as if in agreement. Together, the three of them walked back to the city, united by a common purpose and the invisible thread of fate that had brought them there. As the shadows of night fell over Oakwood, Abigail knew that they were closer than ever to unraveling the mystery, but she also sensed that the real challenge was yet to come. The shadows of the past were long and dark, and bringing them to light could change everything, not just for her, but for the whole town. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Abigail, Lucas, and Buddy set off towards the hills outside Oakwood. The address of former Deputy Robert Martinez was written down on a crumpled piece of paper in Lucas's hand, a last vestige of hope in the search for the truth about Lily's disappearance. The winding road led to a remote area, dotted with sparse houses and centuries-old trees. Abigail felt her heart beating faster at every turn, anticipation and fear mixing in her chest. "Do you think he'll talk to us?" she asked Lucas, her voice betraying her anxiety. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "There's only one way to find out. We're in this together, Abby." Finally, they arrived at a small wooden house, partially hidden by dense woods. An elderly man was sitting on the porch, his watchful eyes observing the approach of the car. Abigail took a deep breath, gathering her courage before getting out of the vehicle. Buddy jumped out just behind her, sniffing the air with interest. "Mr. Martinez?" Lucas called out, stepping forward cautiously. "We're Lucas Harrison and Abigail Carter. We'd like to talk to you about an old case." The man stood up slowly, his wrinkled face a mask of caution. "Carter? Are you related to Elizabeth?" Abigail nodded. "She was my grandmother. We're investigating Lily Thompson's disappearance." A flash of recognition passed through Martinez's eyes. He was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Come in. This is a conversation we shouldn't have out in the open." Inside the modest house, Martinez led them into a living room crammed with old books and papers. Buddy settled at Abigail's feet, his watchful eyes never leaving the ex-delegate. "I knew this day would come," Martinez began, his voice tired. "The past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how hard we try to run away from it." He stood up, walking over to an old trunk in the corner of the room. From it, he pulled out a folder yellowed by time. "This contains everything I know about Lily Thompson's case," he explained, placing the folder on the coffee table. "Things that never made it into the official reports." Abigail and Lucas exchanged tense glances before opening the folder. Inside, they found reports, photographs, and handwritten notes detailing the events of that fateful night. "Sheriff Thompson found out about Lily and Elizabeth's escape plan," Martinez narrated, his voice low and serious. "He was furious, determined to stop his daughter from ruining his life, as he put it." Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes as she read the details. "What happened?" Martinez sighed heavily. "The night they were planning to run away, the sheriff intercepted Lily. There was a heated argument. Witnesses reported screams coming from the Thompson house." Lucas frowned, flipping through the documents. "But there's no mention of that in the official reports." "Because the sheriff suppressed them," Martinez explained, the bitterness evident in his voice. "He had enough power to cover up anything he wanted." "What about Lily?" Abigail asked, dreading the answer. Martinez looked at her with eyes full of regret. "She disappeared that night. The sheriff claimed that she had run off on her own, abandoning Elizabeth. But I always suspected there was more to the story." Buddy, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood up, sniffing the air intensely. He approached Martinez, staring at the ex-delegate as if he could see right through him. "That dog," Martinez muttered, reaching out hesitantly to Buddy. "He reminds me of—" "Lily's dog," Abigail added softly. "We think Buddy might have some connection to him." Martinez nodded slowly. "Lily's dog disappeared the same night. Some said he was the key to the whole mystery." Lucas leaned forward, his journalistic curiosity piqued. "Mr. Martinez, do you think Sheriff Thompson was responsible for Lily's disappearance?" The former deputy was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. "I can't prove anything, but yes, I always believed he was involved. The sheriff was a powerful and dangerous man. He would do anything to protect his reputation and that of his family." Abigail felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over her. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you keep this secret for so long?" Martinez looked at her with tired, guilt-ridden eyes. "Fear Ms. Carter. Sheriff Thompson had powerful connections. He made it clear that anyone who tried to investigate the case would face consequences. I was a coward, and now I have to live with that guilt." A heavy silence fell over the room. Abigail looked at Lucas, seeing in him the same determination she felt growing inside her. "It's not too late to do the right thing," Lucas finally said. "Mr. Martinez, would you be willing to testify about all this?" The ex-delegate hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yes, I think it's time. Lily and Elizabeth deserve justice, however belated." Abigail felt a mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and renewed determination. "What do we do now?" she asked Lucas. "Now," Lucas replied, his voice firm, "we bring this story to light. It's time for Oakwood to face its past. As they prepared to leave, Buddy approached Martinez once more, laying his head gently on his lap. The former deputy smiled sadly, stroking the dog. "You know," he said softly, "they say dogs can feel things we can't. Maybe this one is here to remind us. Maybe this one is here to remind us that some bonds are never broken, not even by time." Abigail nodded, feeling a wave of emotion run through her. She knew they were about to open a Pandora's box, unearthing long-buried secrets and potentially shaking the foundations of Oakwood. But as they left Martinez's house, with the sun now high in the sky, Abigail felt a growing certainty. No matter what came next, they would face it together, she, Lucas, and the faithful Buddy, united by a common purpose and a desire for justice. The mystery of Lily Thompson was about to be revealed, and with it, decades of secrets and lies. Oakwood would never be the same again, and Abigail knew that her own life had changed irrevocably. But she was ready to face whatever came, with Lucas by her side and Buddy guiding the way. The return to Oakwood was marked by a tense silence. Abigail, Lucas, and Buddy were immersed in thoughts about Martinez's revelations. The folder with the evidence weighed heavily on Abigail's lap as a physical reminder of the responsibility they now bore. As they entered the town, they noticed a different atmosphere. Groups of people chatted quietly on the sidewalks, casting curious glances at the passing car. It seemed that news of their investigation had already spread. "I don't think we can keep this a secret any longer," Lucas muttered, parking in front of Abigail's apartment. She nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. It's time to face it head on. They had barely entered the apartment when Abigail's phone rang. It was Dorothy, the receptionist from the veterinary clinic. "Abigail, dear?" Dorothy's voice sounded concerned. "There's a group of people here asking about you and Buddy. They seem agitated." Abigail exchanged an alarmed glance with Lucas. "Thanks, Dorothy. We'll be there soon." As they made their way to the clinic, the streets seemed even busier. People pointed and whispered as they passed. Buddy, feeling the tension, was restless in the back seat. At the clinic, they found a small group gathered at the entrance. Among them, Abigail recognized familiar faces: the mayor, some members of the city council, and, to her surprise, her own uncle, James Carter. "Abigail." James stepped forward, his expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "What do you think you're doing? Rummaging through old stories, disturbing the peace of the town?" Lucas stepped forward, placing himself protectively at Abigail's side. "Mr. Carter, with all due respect, there are truths that need to come out." The mayor, a burly middle-aged man named George Hawkins, snorted. "Miss Carter, Mr. Harrison, we understand that you mean well, but this could be detrimental to Oakwood. Some stories are better left in the past." Abigail felt a wave of indignation rise up inside her. "Better for whom, Mayor? For the families who never got answers. For the victims who have been silenced." A murmur ran through the crowd that was beginning to form around them. Buddy, sensing the tension, stood firmly beside Abigail, as if to protect her. "You don't understand the ramifications of this, Abigail," her uncle argued. "There are reputations at stake, families that will be destroyed." "What about Lily's family?" Lucas retorted. "Don't they deserve to know the truth?" The heated debate was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected figure. It was Frank Donovan, Lily's old friend whom they had met a few days earlier. "Enough!" His shaky but firm voice cut through the air. "It's about time the truth came out. I was there that night. I saw what happened to Lily." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Abigail felt her heart race. "Mr. Donovan, what did you see?" Frank looked around as if seeking courage before continuing. "I saw Sheriff Thompson taking Lily by force. She was screaming, begging. Her dog. He tried to protect her, but the sheriff kicked him away. After that, no one saw Lily again." Frank's words fell like bombs on the crowd. Exclamations of shock and indignation echoed through the street. Mayor Hawkins, visibly upset, tried to calm the situation. "Let's all stay calm. These are just allegations. We have no proof." "Yes, we do," Lucas intervened, holding up the folder Martinez had given them. "We have evidence that was suppressed at the time. Former Deputy Martinez is willing to testify." The mention of Martinez caused another commotion. Abigail saw fear in the eyes of some of those present. especially the older ones who probably knew the true extent of the power Sheriff Thompson had once wielded. "This is crazy," James Carter exclaimed. "You're going to destroy a dead man's reputation based on rumors and old papers." Abigail turned to her uncle, tears of frustration in her eyes. "What about Lily's reputation? What about Grandma Elizabeth's pain all these years? Don't they deserve justice?" At that moment, Buddy started barking insistently, attracting everyone's attention. He ran to the middle of the street, where a car had just stopped. Out of the vehicle stepped an elderly woman, who Abigail immediately recognized from the photos. It was Rose Thompson, Lily's younger sister. Rose walked slowly to the center of the group, her eyes fixed on Buddy. "That dog," she murmured, her voice laced with emotion. "He's identical to Lily's." Abigail approached gently. "Mrs. Thompson, we've discovered the truth about what happened to your sister." Rose looked at Abigail, then at Lucas, and finally at Frank Donovan. Tears began to run down her wrinkled face. "After all these years," she whispered. "Finally." The mood in the crowd changed perceptibly. The presence of Rose, the last living connection to Lily, seemed to have dispelled the last resistance. Mayor Hawkins, sensing the change, snorted again. Maybe it's time we revisited this case officially. I'll call an emergency meeting of the city council tomorrow." As the crowd began to disperse, many still quietly discussing the surprising events, Abigail found herself at the center of a small group. Lucas, Sue, Rose Thompson, Frank Donovan, and Serge, of course, faithful Buddy. Rose knelt down with difficulty, stroking Buddy with trembling hands. "It's like a piece of Lily has come back to us," she murmured. Abigail felt Lucas squeeze her hand gently. She looked at him, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of emotions she felt: relief, determination, and a growing sense that they were on the brink of something monumental. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Lucas smiled, a tired but hopeful smile. "Now, Abby, we keep going. We keep going until the whole truth comes out, until Lily and Elizabeth get the justice they deserve." As the sun began to set over Oakwood, casting long shadows across the streets, Abigail knew that the real battle was just beginning. But with Lucas at her side, Buddy at her feet, and the weight of history in her hands, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The storm they had unleashed was about to break over Oakwood, washing away decades of secrets and lies. And in the eye of that hurricane, Abigail found an unexpected peace, knowing that, at last, the truth would have its chance to shine through. The morning of the town council meeting dawned with a heavy sky, as if nature itself reflected the tension that hung over Oakwood. Abigail woke up early, her nerves on edge. Buddy, sensing her anxiety, stayed close to her heels, offering silent comfort. Lucas arrived shortly after Durr, bringing coffee and a renewed determination in his eyes. "Ready for this?" he asked softly, handing Abigail a steaming cup. She nodded, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. "As ready as I can be." The town hall was packed when they arrived. It seemed that all of Oakwood had gathered to witness this historic moment. Abigail saw familiar faces in the crowd: Dorothy from the veterinary clinic, John Wilson from the barn, and even her Uncle James, who seemed torn between concern and curiosity. Mayor Hawkins opened the session, his voice trembling slightly as he announced the purpose of the meeting. "We are here today to re-examine the events surrounding the disappearance of Lily Thompson, which occurred over 4 decades ago." A murmur ran through the room as Abigail and Lucas were called up to present their findings. With Buddy faithfully at her side, Abigail stood up, feeling the weight of all the stares on her. "A few weeks ago," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "I found an abandoned dog. What I didn't know was that this encounter would lead me to unearth a story of forbidden love, prejudice, and a terrible injustice." Lucas continued, detailing his investigations, the evidence they had uncovered, and the testimonies they had collected. With each revelation, the atmosphere in the room became more tense. When it came time for Frank Donovan to testify, a sepulchral silence fell over the assembly. With a trembling but determined voice, Frank recounted what he had witnessed that fateful night. "I saw Sheriff Thompson dragging Lily to his car," he said, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "She was screaming, begging. Her dog tried to protect her, but was brutally pulled away. After that, no one saw Lily again." Exclamations of shock and indignation echoed around the room. Abigail saw some older people exchange meaningful glances, as if silently confirming long-held suspicions. The most impactful moment, however, came when Robert Martinez, the former deputy, stood up to speak. His confession about how Sheriff Thompson had suppressed evidence and threatened witnesses caused a stir in the room. "I've carried this guilt for decades," Martinez concluded, his voice breaking. "I should have done more. I should have spoken up sooner. I apologize to Lily, to Elizabeth, and to this entire community." Rose Thompson, who had been sitting silently until then, stood up with difficulty. "There's nothing to forgive," she said, her voice weak but clear. "You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." As more people came forward, sharing fragments of long-suppressed memories and suspicions, Abigail felt a change in the air. It was as if a collective weight was being lifted from Oakwood. Years of secrets and guilt finally coming to the surface. Mayor Hawkins, visibly shaken, tried to maintain order. This is extraordinary," he stammered. "Clearly, we need a full official investigation." It was at that moment that Buddy, who had remained quiet at Abigail's feet, suddenly stood up and began barking insistently. All eyes turned to the dog, who ran over to Rose Thompson and put his head in her lap. Rose, with tears in her eyes, stroked Buddy gently. "It's like a piece of Lily is here with us," she whispered. The scene moved everyone present. It was as if Buddy, in some inexplicable way, was connecting the past to the present, giving a voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. Abigail approached Rose, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Thompson, I promise you that we will do everything in our power to find out the whole truth about what happened to Lily." Rose nodded, taking Abigail's hand. "Thank you, darling. You don't know how much this means to me, to all of us." The rest of the meeting was a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. It was agreed that an official investigation would be reopened, with the help of state authorities to ensure impartiality. Mayor Hawkins, recognizing the gravity of the situation, promised full cooperation and transparency. When the meeting finally ended hours later, Abigail found herself exhausted but strangely energized. Lucas wrapped her in a tight hug, whispering words of pride and encouragement in her ear. Outside the town hall, a crowd had gathered. Abigail was surprised to see that, instead of hostility, there was a palpable sense of relief, as if the whole city had been holding its breath for decades and could finally exhale. "You did it, Abby," Lucas said, holding her hand. "You brought the truth to light." Abigail shook her head, looking at Buddy, who was sitting patiently next to her. "We did it, all of us." As they walked through the town square, Abigail noticed something extraordinary. People who normally barely greeted each other were chatting animatedly. Old grudges seemed to have been put aside, replaced by a sense of common purpose. Rose Thompson approached them, leaning on Frank Donovan's arm. "You two," she said, her voice full of emotion, "have brought hope back to Oakwood. I can't thank you enough." Abigail smiled, feeling tears forming in her eyes. "There's no need for thanks, Mrs. Thompson. It was what needed to be done." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Abigail felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced for weeks. The road ahead would still be long and possibly difficult, but for the first time, she felt that Oakwood was ready to face its past and build a fairer, more honest future. With Lucas by her side and Buddy guiding the way, Abigail knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The truth, buried for so long, finally had a chance to blossom, and with it, the promise of healing and redemption for an entire community. 6 months had passed since the tumultuous meeting at Oakwood Town Hall. Fall had given way to winter, and now spring was beginning to emerge, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to reflect the profound changes taking place in the small town. Abigail woke up early that morning, the rising sun casting a soft glow through the curtains. Buddy, as always, was at the foot of the bed, his watchful eyes following her every move. Lucas, who now spent more nights there than in his own home, was still sound asleep. With a contemplative sigh, Abigail got up and walked over to the window. The city she saw now was very different from the one 6 months ago. The official investigations had brought to light long-buried truths, not just about Lily Thompson, but about decades of secrets and injustices. The late Sheriff Thompson was posthumously charged with Lily's disappearance. Evidence discovered on a remote Thompson family property revealed Lily's tragic end. She'd been held captive for weeks before succumbing to untreated pneumonia. Lily's body was finally found and given a proper burial, with the whole town turning out to pay their respects. But Lily and Elizabeth's story had become more than a tragedy. It became a catalyst for profound changes in Oakwood. The town, confronted with its past of intolerance and secrets, had committed itself to building a more open and inclusive future. Abigail smiled as she saw a group of volunteers working on what would soon be the Lily Elizabeth Garden of Remembrance, a space dedicated not only to the two lovers, but to all victims of prejudice and injustice. A movement in the bed caught her eye. Lucas had woken up and was watching her with a sleepy smile. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Abigail returned to the bed and sat down next to him. "About how everything has changed, how a love story from the past has transformed our present." Lucas nodded, pulling her into a hug. "And to think it all started with a dog lost in the rain." As if hearing his name, Buddy jumped on the bed, snuggling between them. Abigail laughed, stroking the dog's soft fur. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes I wonder if Buddy wasn't sent to us, as if somehow Lily and Elizabeth were guiding our way." Lucas smiled, understanding. "Who knows? There are more mysteries in this world than we can understand." The next day was full of activity. The town was preparing for the inauguration of the Garden of Remembrance, which would coincide with the launch of Abigail and Lucas' book, Ties of the Past, the story of Lily and Elizabeth. On arriving at the ceremony site, Abigail was greeted by familiar faces and warm smiles. Rose Thompson, now a beloved figure in the community, hugged her warmly. "Thank you, darling," Rose whispered, "for bringing my sister back to us." Mayor Hawkins, visibly thinner and with a more serene air, gave an emotional speech about community transformation and redemption. Frank Donovan and Robert Martinez, once plagued by guilt, were now seen as heroes for having the courage to speak the truth. When it was Abigail's turn to speak, she felt a lump in her throat. Lucas squeezed her hand in support, and Buddy, sitting obediently next to her, looked at her with those wise, ancient eyes. "6 months ago," Abigail began, her voice gaining strength, "I was just an idealistic young woman who found a lost dog in the rain. I had no idea that this encounter would lead me on a journey that would change not only my life, but that of an entire community." She paused, looking at the attentive faces in front of her. Lily and Elizabeth's story isn't just about forbidden love or injustice, it's about courage. The courage to love, even when the world says it's wrong. The courage to seek the truth, even when it's painful. And the courage to face our mistakes and grow from them. Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes, but continued. "Oakwood faced its dark past and chose the light. We chose honesty over secrets, love over hate, and community over division. This garden is not just a memorial to Lily and Elizabeth, it's a reminder of who we choose to be from now on." When Abigail finished her speech, there was a moment of reverent silence before the crowd erupted into applause. Lucas wrapped her in a tight hug, tears shining in his eyes. The ceremony continued with the official opening of the garden. Rose Thompson and Elizabeth's great niece cut the ribbon together, symbolizing the union of two families so long separated by prejudice and tragedy. As people explored the new space, Abigail found herself standing in front of the central statue, two female figures intertwined, with a faithful dog at their feet. The plaque below read simply, "To Lily and Elizabeth, and to all those who had the courage to love." Lucas approached, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" Abigail smiled, leaning into him. "About how love can transcend time, how the choices we make today echo down the generations." Buddy, sitting patiently next to them, suddenly raised his head and barked softly. Abigail followed his gaze and, for a moment, could have sworn she saw two ethereal figures smiling at her from a distance. A young Lily and Elizabeth, holding hands, waving in thanks before disappearing into the light of the setting sun. "Did you see that?" she whispered to Lucas. He smiled, kissing her forehead. "I saw love, Abby, past, present, and future, all intertwined." As the sun set over Oakwood, casting a golden glow over the Garden of Remembrance, Abigail felt a deep peace settle in her heart. The journey that had begun with a dog lost in the rain had transformed not only her life, but an entire community. The mystery of Lily Thompson had been solved, but the true legacy was the love that had survived through the decades, inspiring new generations to love without fear and to fight for the truth. With Lucas by her side and Buddy guiding the way, Abigail knew that her own love story was just beginning, and just like Lily and Elizabeth, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring, strengthened by the power of love, truth, and community. As they walked home under the starry sky, Abigail, Lucas, and Buddy were more than just a couple and their dog. They were the guardians of an eternal love story, the bearers of a torch of hope that would light the way for generations to come. And in Oakwood, a town once divided by secrets, now united by truth, the seeds of a brighter, more compassionate future were beginning to blossom, nurtured by the love that had waited patiently for decades to finally be told.